Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Fiona Simson and I'm the President of the NFF. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand here in Canberra, the Ngunnawal people. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which all of you are joining us today. A special shout out to the Gomeroi people who are the traditional owners of the Liverpool Plains, where my farm is based. We're very lucky in the Liverpool Plains to have always had a joint and respectful relationship with the Gomeroi. I'm really pleased to be here in person today whilst we're still online. At least I'm not at home on my kitchen bench with my cake tins happening. And this is happening today in the middle of a very big week of meetings for myself and the team from NFF with many of the MPs in Canberra. I'd ask everyone to note that we put the call out for this meeting today by public invite. So we haven't had any restrictions at all on who could join us. And so I do ask that you please be mindful of this, but I welcome anybody who's joining us today, whether they're members, whether our partners, or whether you're just somebody who is interested in what the future of agriculture looks like in Australia. Before we get started, I'd like to also advise that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available afterwards on our social media channels if anybody wants to check up on anything or listen to any of the questions and answers again. And because this is actually being run as a webinar and there's been a public invitation, then it's actually not a conference call. We're not going to take questions directly from you and you won't be able to speak, but you can ask a question in the chat line. And later on, we've got plenty of time for questions and I'll be moderating those questions. We've also had some questions come in previously. We put a call out yesterday as we put the report card out too, and we've had some of those and we hope to be getting to those too. I have to say what an amazing year we've had. Who could have thought this time last year, when we've been in the midst of one of the longest droughts in living memory, we've had bushfires, we had floods, and we even had a locust plague as well. Certainly, you know, it was almost biblical in its proportions. But today, I'm really proud to present this NFF's second annual end of year report card. I hope it is our second annual. Yep, it is our second annual end of year report card. And it's a commitment we gave when we launched our $100 billion vision that we would check in every year and make sure we could assess how we were travelling, having a look at some of the headwinds and having a look at some of the tailwinds. And some of you may have already heard media this morning around some of those scores and some of the things we're doing well and some of the things we're yet to do well. I think as an industry, we really should be immensely proud of the result. As Lisa Miller said on ABC Breakfast this morning, for those of you that saw it, it's a report card that any school student would be proud of. And really, in the face of gigantic challenges and a really challenging few years, farmers have certainly held the line in terms of output and in terms of value. I'll very soon hand over to our CEO, Tony Mahar, to give a detailed overview of the progress against our separate roadmap pillars. But I did also want to give you just a little flavour of my week. So this week, Tony and I have met with the Prime Minister. And through COVID, especially as we've gone through some of our challenges, we've been in close contact with him, his office and his senior ministers. On Monday, PM Morrison thanked the NFF and our members for the pragmatic and collaborative way that we'd engage with his government and national cabinet to ensure that we could keeping on. Yet, as you'd recall, I released a paper at the Press Club called Growing Australia. Yes. And that has been widely taken on. And I think it's good to know that our responses, that our leadership has been acknowledged at the highest levels of government. He genuinely thanked us for our contribution. So a good year, certainly some challenges ahead, but one as an industry that I think we've certainly navigated with success. Tony, I'll hand over to you now to start the detailed overview of the report card. And please don't be shy with your questions. start putting them up and we can make sure that we get to them, and can't guarantee we'll get to all the questions, but certainly if you start putting them up as you think of them, then we can actually then make sure we can come to as many as we can. So thanks so much for tuning in today, and I'll hand over now to Tony Mahar.
Thanks, Fiona. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. As Fiona said, this is our second report card on our $100 billion roadmap document, many of which you will have seen. And when we did the roadmap, when we launched it 2 years ago, we were really conscious that we didn't want this report card, this strategy to be have some profile and get some support for, you know, a few months, and then for it to be put in the third drawer and not looked at again. We're really committed to reporting on it every year, and that's what we're doing today. Obviously, last year we had an event in Canberra, and things have changed in 12 months quite significantly, as Fiona said. So today's an opportunity to quickly go through the report card and give a bit of a summary on the progress that we've made on our aspirations and our metrics. And that's what I'd like to do today. And we have been really fortunate in the last 2 years that the $100 billion aspiration has become the new narrative. It's been picked up by all sides of Parliament, stakeholders like retailers and education institutions, and, you know, the broader supply chain. So we're really delighted, have always been really delighted that it's got some traction, and as I say, are really committed to reporting on those and giving people an update on how we're going. And as Fiona alluded to, there's been tailwinds and headwinds, and that's what I'm going to go through today. It's important to note that the report card itself is a snapshot, a bit of a glimpse and a bit of a, you know, an assessment of how things have panned out over the last 12 months or so. So reflecting some of the dynamics and some of the policies and programs that have been announced and that, you know, NFF and other organisations have advocated for, but also reflecting some of the global dynamics that we've seen. So whether that's, you know, the latest trade disruptions, or whether that's droughts or natural disasters, or those sorts of things that have, of course, impacted on, you know, our target, our trajectory towards that $100 billion. We hope by sharing this assessment today, we can get a bit of a steer on what things are going to influence us, and we've always acknowledged that there are going to be a whole range of things that will impact and influence the trajectory and the progress towards $100 billion. So let's get into the 5 pillars. I'm going to quickly whip through some of these issues that have affected the trajectory, and I'd love to get some questions coming through the chat room, and towards the end we can look at answering some of those. So certainly in terms of pillar 1, the customers in the value chain, we think that we're probably under par or below expectations. Here there's been a whole series of events. Certainly the upheaval for COVID has been a major impact on the industry, and it'll be really important that we continue to maintain a strong supply chain going forward. There has been disruption, but agriculture has largely continued on through the last 9 months or so with COVID. In addition to that, given we're an export-orientated sector, we've had things like the RCEP agreement, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, that's been in discussion for a number of years. That sort of finally got completed, and also the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, again, number of years in development for that, but that will send a really good signal to Australian farmers that there is, you know, increased reliance on export markets, despite what we've seen happening in the last couple of months with China. So those sorts of things, and the ongoing developments of the EU and the UK free trade agreements yet to be completed, of course, but strong signals there that there should be some continued improved market access there. So those sorts of things. One of the downsides, I suppose, of this pillar is the ongoing challenges that we've seen in biosecurity. So for us, biosecurity is an absolute fundamental of the agriculture industry. We've seen in the last 12 months or so a number of incursions, so whether that's Capra beetle, leaf miner, serpentine leaf miner, and others. We really do think that the government has underinvested in the biosecurity system, and that there's not enough coordination between Commonwealth and state. So that's that's a reflection for this year that we'd like to see addressed in the coming years. But there has been some things, as I say, the IFM, International Freight Assistance Mechanism, to try and respond to some of the COVID issues has been welcomed. So really for customers in the value chain, it's a bit below expectations, but hopefully some upside coming into next year off for a strong production cycle for this year. So Pillar 2, moving into Pillar 2, growing sustainably. Again, some really interesting policy developments this year. One, of course, was the NFF's policy to commit to a net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Some very clear caveats in that policy. Those of anyone that's familiar with that policy, there's a couple of really clear caveats in there, but it's really important for the agriculture sector to be part of the conversation and to continue to work with government to develop this policy, but to be around the table to make sure that farmers and agriculture have a say and get to shape what that policy looks like. And we continue to look for opportunities that will allow agriculture and farmers to recoup and get remunerated and recognised for, things like soil carbon sequestration. There are some significant opportunities there, and there's a number of sectors, whether that's grains or red meat or any other sectors, that have got sustainability plans in place that have emissions reductions as part of those. So the NFF policy was a significant milestone this year, again noting the caveats that are in there. In terms of the sustainability frameworks, I mentioned a couple in there, that whether that's grains, dairy, each sector has largely got sustainability frameworks, and what we're really trying to do as part of our agricultural sustainability framework is to bring those together and to harmonise those systems, not duplicate them. We recognise there's significant concerns around all of these systems and certification processes that are out there. What we want to do is to bring all of those systems together in some sort of meta standard that allows each sector to harmonise and come together in a single system. And what we'd really like to do is to see some value, about $5 billion worth of value delivered to farmers for the land management systems that they have in place, and to develop a market at the end of the day to reward and recognise farmers. So the agricultural sustainability framework is a key step in that direction. And so in terms of overall summary for the second pillar, it's about as expected, probably a C+, I suppose, if you're looking at a framework, a report card. Some other things in relation to that is obviously food waste. The government committed, we've got a metric in the roadmap around food waste, so $4 million to establish an entity to combat food waste. The Murray-Darling Basin plan also continues to present some serious challenges, but there's been any number of reports in that regard. So we hope that while there's been some rain in the system this year, we need some action from government on Murray-Darling Basin. There's no doubt about that. It's just not delivering what we think it can. So more work to do, but as expected, as I say, C+ for the second pillar. In terms of the next pillar, unlocking innovation, in the report card, we've got 3 metrics in there, and we've rated them 8, 8 and 6 out of 10. So the big achievement really is the Agriculture Innovation Australia, where the 15 RDCs have actually, for the first time, agreed to collaborate and set up a new entity to tackle some of the really big issues, cross-cutting issues that agriculture faces and the industry has continued to face. So whether that's emissions, whether that's water, whether that's energy, transport, whether you're a blueberry grower or a barley grower, those sorts of things will really impact on profitability, productivity, and go right across states and right across sectors. So that, we hope, is going to be a really big milestone and a good achievement for the industry. We launched this week the Regional Tech Hub. So that's a great initiative where it'll be people on the end of the phone real people that you can talk to address any of your concerns about connecting to the internet, staying connected and using all of the technology and data that we know is out there. That will be a significant benefactor or advantage to the industry in terms of about $20 billion. So that regional tech hub that was established this week hopefully will help people stay connected, get connected and utilise data a little bit more. And also in terms of government policy, the government announced their technology roadmap, which identifies hydrogen as a priority technology, which again I think will be significant for reducing costs and also back to the previous pillar around potentially reducing emissions as well. So in terms of that third pillar, above expectations, 4 or 5 out of 10, which isn't too bad. 4 or 5 stars, sorry. So pillar 4, capable people, vibrant communities. Obviously we've identified, and it's not a new issue, but labour has been the key issue coming out of this year. COVID has exacerbated the labour challenges in the industry. Planes not landing, people not moving, being able to move across borders. So a major issue that has been really compounded in the last 12 months. So in terms of the broader report card for this this pillar, it really is below expectations. We simply have to do better in the labour space, and we need a compilation or a suite of measures from government to actually help with that. It is not going to be one single issue that's going to solve this huge challenge. So COVID's exacerbated that, and we've seen various reports this year about 26,000 people short in the industry. Notwithstanding that, we have seen a couple of good things, and one was the enrolments in agriculture related studies up by about 10%. So that is a really positive issue for the industry, and the people are seeing agriculture as a career. We want to make sure that we keep people in the industry. Another initiative that we've seen is that the $6,000 for travel and accommodation costs to actually encourage, whether it's school leavers or people that have been displaced from their jobs in urban communities, to go out and see rural and regional Australia and get a job on farm. So $6,000 to help with the costs of that, which has been a positive initiative from government. Yet to see really high take up of that, but we hope it is seen as attractive for people, and other things like the job ready graduates, $400 million for regional students and regional universities, which is a really good thing. And another big initiative this year was the development of Farm Safe, and some new funding for that to bring a national approach to Farm Safe. There's been a lot of contentious issues around farm safety, and it is a real issue that the industry needs to work with government to try and improve. We're leading that, and we want to really cooperate right across the industry on farm safety, and you know, quad bikes has been a really key issue there in terms of the rollover and operator protection devices that the ACCC recommended. The NFF wants to keep quad bikes. Despite what you might hear, we are very much in favour of quad bikes and want to keep them as a really essential part of the farm business and farm landscape. We just got to make them safer. It's we can't simply stand by and let up to 20 people get killed on these things each year. We want to keep them. We want to keep them safe. So in terms of that whole pillar, probably below expectations, as I say, largely driven by the COVID response impact on the labour issues. Moving on to the last pillar, and that's capital and risk management. It's been a tough 4 or 5 years. Fiona alluded to what a reasonably good year this has been, but in the last 3 to 5 years, it's been significantly challenging for a large part of the country in terms of drought, flood, fire. So there has been major disruptions to the production sector, and of course that limits or impacts on investment and the available capital. We know that agriculture is a really volatile sector, one of the, or if not the most, one of the most volatile sectors in the Australian economy. So these sorts of natural disasters and things like that aren't doing us any favours in terms of getting investment. So we've really got to make sure that we do whatever we can to manage risk better, and we've done some work on that this year. In terms of drought, we did see the government announce $100 million under the Future Drought Fund to boost farm resilience, and those projects have been announced a couple of months ago, so we're wanting to make sure that they do deliver, because again, this is a little bit like the labour issue. There's not going to be one single issue that solves the drought problem. It's going to be a reoccurring issue and event on the Australian landscape, and we as an industry have to get better at managing it and working with government on what solutions and what levers they can pull, in addition to industry helping to build resilience and managing drought a little bit better. In terms of other investment issues, the Foreign Investment Review Board changes, while driving down the risk, we hope will make Australia more attractive for investment, and we do think that there is a significant cash shortfall, capital shortfall, and 2020 saw much of the overseas investment dry up, as I say, in relation to a range of things, but the Australian government lowered thresholds for the FIRB this year, but we hope this is offsetted by the opportunities that we've seen. This year really has, if you believe the ABARES figures, forecasted for next year to be around about 65 billion. I think our report says 61 billion, but there is huge upside, so we want to make sure that the industry is seen as a positive investment opportunity. So in terms of that pillar, about as expected is our assessment for how we've gone against some of the metrics and milestones in the fifth pillar of capital and risk management. Moving on then to the opportunities and outlook for 2021. As I said, the ABARES has reported about 65 billion for farm gate output, which is really great, off the back of probably the biggest grain harvest the country's ever seen, which is really fantastic, coming off a couple of lean years. But if we can get a continuation of good seasonal conditions, then we'd like to see that trajectory continues in an upward trend. We've got the agricultural sustainability framework, which again will be a long-term thing. We want to see that sort of stepped up and start to deliver value for farmers. Ag Innovation Australia to address some of these big cross-cutting issues, which is a good thing, much needed, I have to say, and things like water and energy and transport, which go right across the sectors, and continued investment and focus on some of these other countries like EU, UK, and looking at existing markets like Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, looking to expand our markets. That will be where some opportunities are. And clearly there's some headwinds that we're facing. So the ongoing disruptions with trade in China, particularly, and the global market volatility are significant headwinds, and we want to make sure that we can get over these challenges and resume what we hope is a long and sustainable trade relationship with Chinese consumers. We know how much they love Australian food and fibre. The international travel, when planes start landing here, we can hopefully do more in the labour space, but that will be a significant issue going forward. Again, it's not a new issue, but being compounded and exacerbated by the lack of backpackers, the lack of seasonal workers, the lack of holiday makers coming to Australia and seeing rural and regional communities. So certainly a number of headwinds, and obviously the recovery from COVID. Fiona alluded to the Get Australia Growing document that we released earlier this year. We do think agriculture is really well placed to kickstart the economy if the seasonal conditions allow. I think rural and regional Australia can be a real kickstart to the economy, like we've seen this year, if we continue to get great conditions to allow that to happen. So we're remaining really optimistic about our target towards $100 billion. There are some challenges, of course, there always has been, but with the right policy settings, we'd like to think that we are heading in the right direction. There is going to be, as you can see on that slide there, probably a shortfall, but things like digital technology, increased export markets will hopefully get us towards that $100 billion. So look, that's a really quick overview of the 5 pillars and how we've progressed this year and some of the challenges that we've faced. So Fiona, happy to take any questions and have a discussion about any of those issues that I quickly ran through.
Yep, thanks so much, Tony. And I'll just remind everybody there is a chat function there on the website of our webinar where you can post questions yourself. We've also had a few come in earlier via social media, and some people are actually texting them through and emailing them through. So we've got a few questions here. But we'll try and take your questions if you're able to pop them up. So the first one, and so I'll moderate, Tony, and we might do a bit of a tag team thing. You can answer most of them.
I'll try and answer them.
Yeah, so the first question is from Sue. Do you think Australians will go back to forgetting about where their food and fibre comes from in 2021, i.e. after COVID or whenever it is that we're out of COVID?
Oh, look, I think there'll be a relaxation once the supermarket shelves have largely gotten back to normal, but I don't think they'll forget it anytime soon. I think it was a real shock for people to see empty supermarket shelves, and whether it was toilet paper or whether it was meat or other products. That was a real shock. We've never had to really, in our lifetimes probably, see that and have to deal with that. So I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And I know that we did a report this year that said 1 in 4 consumers actually have got a much better appreciation of where their food and fibre comes from. So I'd like to think that that is going to stay with people. And it demonstrated the fragility of the supply chain, but what it also did that made people recognise that, as we know, farmers are on the job. You know, they've got Australia's back and they're actually producing this food and fibre. And sure, there might have been some shortages, but no one went without food. And you know, fingers crossed in this country, no one will go without food or fibre.
No, I think that's true, Tony. And I think too, it makes me think about the fact that industry's really recognised that over the last decade or so, we haven't been so good at getting our story and our messaging out there. And we've allowed some of the environmental movement, for example, to take the space that we should have had and could have had. And so NFF's led projects now like Telling Our Story, which has allowed us to put up billboards through COVID with the Got Your Back campaign, and now too as we're actually profiling some of the diverse farmers that we have in our industry. Christina on the cover of our report card today is one of them. So I think industry is stepping up. There are, now a number of initiatives that has seen agriculture. PIFA has done work on Ag Day, for example, again, another project we initiated, seeing farmers in schools this year. And Youth in Ag does a lot of good work as well. I think we're all stepping up, and I think we're taking responsibility now for the fact that if we don't want to be forgotten after COVID, we have to keep that messaging going. So
yeah, if there was a silver lining to COVID, it was the ability to actually tell that story, right? And it was much needed. I mean, we know how difficult it is for a whole of agriculture industry to come together and tell the one story. But I'd like to think that to start that Telling Our Story program that we kicked off was, I hope, a start of a long, proud storytelling experience and an initiative that we can continue to identify the things we've got to work on, but celebrate the things that we've done really well as an industry, and that certainly is putting food and fibre, on the shelves this year.
Yeah, yep, I agree. Okay, question number 2 is from James, and he says there's a lot of talk about agriculture's reduced carbon footprint, but what do you think are the new marketing or market opportunities from a agricultural reduced carbon footprint?
Well, I'd like to think we've still got a bit of work to do in that space, methodologies, etc., which we know have been worked on for a little while. But there's a couple of opportunities for me. One is to actually make sure that agriculture gets to shape the policies that any government, this government or any future government, puts on the table. We know how challenging it's been. We know that it's compromised a couple of governments in the last decade or so. We have to be, as an industry, around the table, and that is the main reason that we have developed this policy, so that agriculture can talk and work with mining or manufacturing or any of the other sectors, that agriculture is around the table. And that's really the most important thing in terms of opportunity, I think, for the industry. But obviously there's other financial opportunities, practical opportunities around soil sequestration and, you know, land management, and rewarding and recognising farmers for the role that they play in managing the land. And carbon has to be part of that. So by, you know, developing these sustainability frameworks, having a policy, it gets us a seat at the table. So I would say, while we can't sort of necessarily touch and feel it as much as we would like right now, by having engagement in the discussion with government, who are the decision makers around this space, that we're really well placed. That's probably the biggest opportunity, in addition to the financial opportunities I hope will come.
Yeah, we've just had a question come in off the back of the previous conversation, actually, that says, can you talk through telling our story a little bit? What is, you know, how does it work? What's the campaign? Is there a campaign? How is it all working? And just talk through a little bit about what's happening with telling our story. Yeah,
sure. So telling our story is a campaign that's being run by NFF in addition with a couple of major partners, and we're certainly still looking for some corporate partners, if anyone's out there looking, to help with this initiative. It is really about making sure that people know all of the great things that farmers and agriculture do, and it's literally telling the story of agriculture in Australia, not ignoring some of the challenges that we've got, whether that's drought or whether that's water or anything else, but it's really about celebrating the great things and the great achievements and the great role that farmers play in rural and regional communities, but the broader economy. So yes, it's all about trade and delivery of food and fibre, but it's the grassroots story of Christina, vegetable grower, you know, that's supplying markets and, you know, moving into the organic space. So it's picking up the stories that we all know, we've sort of often preached to ourselves in the ag sector, but broadening that to the urban community. So we've done things like billboards, we've done, you know, social media activation events that actually allow people to get a bit of a glimpse into the sector through the Australian Farmers website, and as I say, billboards, stories all around the place about all of these great stories that we know are out there, but we just haven't been good enough about telling that story more broadly.
Yeah, it's been giving media some different stories and different footage and different media. It's all very well to complain that they always use the same footage, same pieces, same stories, same people. But if we as an industry are not good at telling our stories, then, you know, they have no option but to find their own. And I see now online, you know, people like Sam Hegney, for example. He does great social media clips, just telling people about, you know, the barley he's growing, the wheat he's growing, and lots of other people doing good things. Art for Ag still does their amazing program where they're sending students into schools and helping tell them all about agriculture as well. So for me, the telling our stories, it was set out not to duplicate what's already out there, but hopefully to provide sort of some overarching framework where we can now insert all these stories. And it's great to see people stepping up. It's great to see actually people taking responsibility. And this campaign, I think, which will continue, we've got enough funding in there. We're still, as Tony said, looking for corporate partners who believe in the future of ag and believe in the importance of telling our story to contribute. But it's good that we've still got money in the kitty to keep it going and rolling over from year to year at the moment.
Yeah, and we definitely do have a long-term strategy. This isn't just about putting billboards up on, you know, the sides of the road or some social media activation or posts and things like that. It's a full strategy, you know, business as usual, and highlighted by, you know, we've got your back type of initiatives this year around COVID. But, you know, Meat Livestock Australia, Nutrien, Woolworths have all been corporate partners that have got behind this because they recognised that we do need a long-term strategy. This isn't a flash in the pan. This isn't just, you know, ads on the back of taxis for 6 months. This is a long-term strategy about telling the story of agriculture.
So another question, Tony, onto a completely different topic, levies. So something that's very near and dear to the heart of farmers because we pay so much money in them. So what are we doing to ensure that levies are invested responsibly and with impact?
Well, bringing together the representative organisations that, so NFF's a representative organisation for agri-futures, and most of the other commodity sector groups play that role with their RDC. So what we've done this year is actually bring together all of those representative organisations, make sure that we're on the same page and that we've got a clear voice to government and to the RDC. So it's a three-way conversation about how levies are used, what sort of strategies are in place, and that the whole of the industry actually benefits from the use of these levies, and that there's transparency in the levy use, and that people have confidence about where their $5 a head or $1 a tonne or $1 a kilo, whatever the levy is, that is being used effectively. So we think we have a really strong role and responsibility to work with government and work with the RDCs in a tripartite way to make sure that that levy system works effectively as it can. And I think some of the issues that have been announced this year, AIA is the big one, but the digital strategy that Minister Littleproud announced earlier this week, some of those things will help towards demonstrating the more use of levies. But it's about transparency, it's about accountability, and it's about ultimately delivering on the use of those levies back to the farmer, and that has been a bit of an Achilles heel with the R&D system because there hasn't been that extension and adoption of the research that's out there. So a strong voice to government and RDCs. Yeah, and it was good to get a presentation from AIA the other day at Members Council, and they're hitting the ground running now. So you know, that's different. That's a different sort of, you talked about that a little in the report card. Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be interesting to see as that unfolds too, and continually looking for that linkage between levies and farmers and making sure that that's nice and transparent and strong. Okay, we've got another interesting question here. How did we determine the scores for each pillar and what metrics were used? It's a really good question. We, at the beginning, I think I said that this is a bit of a snapshot of the progress and achievements that we've made over the last 12 months. So we have set those aspirations, those metrics and those outcomes in the original roadmap. And every year, the last couple of months, we have looked at what has been achieved in terms of NFF and member advocacy, but also the policy achievements and the global dynamics of what's happening in the industry and the environment and politics and everything else basically. So we've done a bit of an assessment internally and rated of how we've gone. So as much as anything, it's a discussion point, but we did have to land on, you know, a rating out of 10. So I think you got a question this morning on the 3 out of 10 for the market access. Obviously, the market access issue hasn't gone well for Australian farmers this year. You know, there's been disruptions, notwithstanding the UK trade discussions and things, but clearly that's an issue. So that's a sort of indicator that's allowed us to give it a 3 out of 10. It's been a real challenge. So internal process, assessing, using our knowledge and expertise and our members' expertise around what's been happening. Yeah, I mean, I'm just reflecting on the trade one, Tony. I think if you asked any farmer out there at the moment, given that we export 70% of what we produce and China takes nearly 30%, if you asked any farmer out there at the moment, you know, how confident they were feeling about trade and their markets, they would not be really positive because it's a huge worry. Yep. So I think that's really indicative of how you know, why we've given it a 3. Yeah. And of course that score may have been completely different at the beginning of the year before COVID, you know, and before we had all those problems too, like the borders being shut and trying to get the product in and out and all of those things. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, the data. Yeah, it is. It's very interesting, and I'll admit it's a little bit subjective, a little bit internal for us to assess that, but we'd like to think we've got a pretty good radar on what's been happening. I can imagine the fun we'd have if we tried to get a rating from all of the farmers across the country on various things, but we're using our best judgment. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. We have another question come in. And it's an interesting one. It says, what role should farming organisations like the NFF play in addressing the safety issues being seen with viral videos being shared on social media by young people on farm? So
I don't know whether this is one.
What
role should we play? So apparently, and I'm obviously out of those videos, Tony. I haven't seen them, but I'm not in the right age demographic. But should we play a role in terms of some of the viral videos, that are going viral, and some of the safety issues concerning those? I mean, we do partner with Farm Safe now, and certainly we've had a safety focus. But should we be playing a role in that?
Oh, look, I think it would be difficult for any organisation, NFF or otherwise, to be cop on the beat around posting videos of any sort. I think that's probably beyond our remit. But what we can do is to actually communicate the importance of farm safety. And put out, whatever we can in terms of messages and toolkits and strategies around the importance of farm safety right across the country. So that's, I think, what we can do from a proactive sense. Make these checklists and toolkits and things available through Farm Safe. That's our remit. I hate to think. I think it's probably beyond us to be.
Yeah. Do you know what I have seen is, which I think is great on social media, is I've seen other young farmers. I've seen young farmers pulling up other young farmers for sometimes using language or posting things that they may have thought were humorous or were just a little bit off centre, and the language that the people are using. I've seen other young farmers, I've seen some really great discussions on social media where young farmers actually start discussing the use of that language, the use of that footage, the use of those photos online, and what that does for our industry and what that does for their image. So I think, I would hate to think that we are could be any sort of cop on the beat. But I do think sometimes that's one of the things where people have to take responsibility. And if you see, videos, if you start doing things, then I think it's important to engage and not let it just go through to the keeper, but engage about some of those issues if they're things that concern you and you've seen those sorts of videos, whatever they are, just as you'd engage on any other ag issue. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Good question. Okay, so there's been lots of talk about workforce and particularly not having any this year. So you used to talk about an ag visa. Is it still a priority for the NFF? Yes,
it is, in short. But
not necessarily called an ag
visa. We have never cared what it's called. We came up with an ag visa a little while ago. What we're happy to have it called is some sort of designated workforce solution. Whatever that's called and whatever shape and colour it looks like, we need that, because at the moment the visa system just doesn't cater to or doesn't respond adequately enough to the workforce challenges that we know are out there. So we do need a dedicated solution that is tailored towards agriculture. So it's got a bit of a mix of the seasonal worker program, a bit of the mix of the backpacker arrangements. We know that people want to move from state to state and farm to farm and move up and down, and whether they're grey nomads or whether they're backpackers from Europe. We recognise that they have been important, they will always be important, but likewise so are the Pacific Island nations, and when they come here and work for 6 months and do such a fantastic job and then go home and spend that money in their economy. So there's a huge win-win there, but it's just disjointed. So very much still in favour of a designated ag workforce solution, and we hope one of the things that we didn't mention is that the government this year has done a ag workforce strategy, which we haven't seen the final report yet, but we hope coming out of that there will be some direction and some more opportunities for us to advocate for that. Yeah,
good. Okay. Yep. What difference will the tech hub you announced yesterday make if you have no connectivity?
It'll be difficult if you have no connectivity, but what it'll allow us to do is to help those people that are having trouble with their existing connectivity. So yes, very challenging for those that don't have connectivity, and we just have to keep advocating for more coverage and more investment in some of those areas that don't have it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's certainly what we're still doing. So there are some better technological solutions now around some of the small cell technology we're seeing. And I think Minister Colton announced yesterday he was talking about the latest round of towers, Wi-Fi towers. We've seen some good improvements in NBN over the last 12, 18, 2 months, 2 years. And that's still bread and butter for us, is making sure that, we know that there's about $20 billion of untapped potential out there if we can get unlock the benefits of digital technology. But that means that everybody has to have good, reliable connectivity wherever they live in Australia, not just on the coast in the population centres. I think the interesting thing has been, Tony, is that since March, I think people have been surprised actually about how much connectivity they do have, because so many people have operated their businesses, their lives, their meetings, everything pretty much, their family meetings over Zoom, over Teams. We certainly have here at the NFF. And sometimes I think it is just, and this is where the Tech Hub comes in, and it's certainly the feedback we've had, how do you navigate your way through whether you should have Wi-Fi, whether you should have fixed wireless, what's the difference? What about NBN, what about Sky Muster, what plan should you go on, how much are you going to download, how can you make all these things work? You don't want to always ask your provider, you don't even know whether you're getting the best deal. So, and sometimes you have to ring with the providers, you have to ring offshore. So I think the Tech Hub will make a difference. It will help people as they're nearly tearing their hair out, if they're having dropouts, if they're not having enough data, if it's costing them a fortune, whatever it is. The Tech Hub, they can ring Trent or one of the people online. It'll make a huge difference, but at the same time, we still, of course, have to try and improve that coverage.
Yeah, and so it's obviously not just a website; it's a 1300 number. So if you don't have connectivity, you can still make a phone call and get some information around connectivity as it suits.
Yep. So we've got another one here, which is, what is the NFF doing to ensure that we're prepared for the next drought? And the next one, and the next one, and not just waiting until the next one to respond?
Yes, a couple of things. One is that we developed a pretty comprehensive national drought policy that we've fed into government in the last 12, 24 months. And we're really pushing that with Shane Stone you're working closely on that, Fiona, and Shane Stone's group. So making sure that government prepare for the next drought now, not in the next drought, and that was the key pillar of that drought policy, was that we actually start preparing for the next drought now. We review what has worked, what hasn't worked, pick up and enhance the stuff that is working, and have another think about the stuff that's not working. So that's really important, and we've been talking to government about another drought workshop and forum next year, so that we are on the front foot for when the next drought happens, because it will happen and it will come. It's a matter of time. The other thing is that, from a practical sense, is we've just completed a series of reports and investigations into risk management strategies and risk management tools that the industry is or isn't using, and working out why they're not using them. So that's thanks to the New South Wales government and a couple of organisations that we worked with to actually look at things like insurance, futures and options, mutuals and cooperatives, and other tools that are out there that some sectors or some parts of the ag community are using, others aren't, identifying why and what we can do to actually enhance some of these ideas. So we'll release that report very soon. I think if it's not in the last couple of weeks of this year, it's early next year, but working with the New South Wales government on that. But that was a national approach, so practical levels and also really high level drought policy stuff.
Yep. Good-o. We're coming to the end of the questions, I think. Maybe an interesting one to finish up on, Tony. What are you most optimistic about next year, or what is the NFF most optimistic about next year for Australian ag?
For me, I think it's I haven't done a lot of driving around the country this last 9 months or so, but when I have, the optimism in the community, and to see what, were dusty, dry, hard paddocks filled with beautiful green and yellow, pastures and crops, and that gives me great hope that the drought was so bad and you know, you thought dams and would never fill and things would never grow again, to travel a little bit around the country and just see the crops and, you know, the animals and the pastures just growing, gives me great optimism, great enthusiasm. So if we can get a good couple of years, we can really start hitting that target towards $100 billion, you know, continue to expand the markets. I think that's a real optimism and real takeout from this year of what a great season, generally speaking, it's been, off the back of some really hard years. Yeah,
look, I think probably the same. Looking at the weather map this morning, I was looking at a big storm cell over Broome, and I can't remember the prediction of rain, but it was massive. And I was looking at that and thinking, okay, so this is perhaps, fingers crossed, the start of their summer storm season up there and their summer rainfall, which is so important to the north. And as we've seen a return to hopefully a little more normal seasonal conditions on the East Coast particularly, and some of those areas, then I think the seasonal break, you know, we are so dependent on the weather for much of our agriculture, not all of it, but much of it. And I do think that I think at the moment there is a feeling of optimism and buoyancy, despite the fact that many people still, you know, it's going to take people many years to pay back, you know, some of the impact of the drought. It was a long, very long drought, and I think the financial impact on people has been enormous. So I think really it's going to take people, even though it started to rain and people are feeling more positive, I think it's going to take a very long time to pay that back. I also think at the moment there are a lot of opportunities in some of the conversations we're having with government, some of the conversations we're having about looking at the way we manage our land differently. And you know, whether that's talking about our biodiversity stewardship scheme or some of the talk about, you know, natural capital markets, Tony, and that's a goal in the roadmap as well, isn't it?
Yep. No, I think that's hopefully that'll come to fruition. It's a big ask to set up a market structure like that and get the metrics and everything right, but that's definitely a medium-term opportunity. Okay,
so I said that last one was the last one, but there has been one more question comes through on the website, so we'll take that, and this will be the lucky last one. Where do we see small-scale agriculture playing in the $100 billion goal, i.e. paddock to plate? You know, we talk about Australia being a niche producer anyway, because world production, our production of even the bulk commodities like wheat and barley and chickpeas and lupins and things is very small and niche. But I guess this question, Tony's going really to the heart of the value adding that a lot of people sometimes are now doing on farm, where they're selling their cattle on the internet in portions, you know, in quarters, for example, to their consumers, or where they're really targeting their smaller scale farms.
Yeah, I think this year has been really great at demonstrating the capacity and the opportunity for some of those small producers. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think there's definitely, and you know, the industry is consolidated, and there's plenty of big corporate farms that are operating, and that will always be the case. Having said that, there are, again, definitely smaller producers, whether they're berries or whether that's cheese or whether that's honey or lupins or chickpeas, you know, bagging up and selling locally, those sorts of things. It really has, I think, again, a silver lining to the dark cloud that has been COVID for this year, people sourcing directly from farmers. So that might be, you know, a small producer in Goulburn Valley or on the coast of South Coast New South Wales, you know, cheese producer or pork producer.
Vegetable producer in Victoria, I'm thinking of Emma Germano's farm shop.
Yep, Christina, on the front of our report card, you know, vegetable producers supplying to retail outlets, to small restaurants and things like that. So there's definitely an opportunity for those small, and I think there always will be, for those small family farms to be able to diversify, differentiate their product and get that market opportunity, whether it's local or whether it's international.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, Australia, as you said, our agricultural industry is hugely diverse. NFF members are diverse too. We have Australian Organics around our table, and some of those are smaller scale producers. But I think sometimes for the smaller, more targeted producers, it's actually attracting young farmers and people who haven't been in the industry before, because sometimes it doesn't cost quite as much to get into a smaller scale production where you're producing a smaller amount of very targeted product. And you know, our $100 billion vision is not just about the big guys, and it's definitely not about producing just more and doing more of what we do now. It's about how do we actually do things differently in the future? How do we actually create and attract and collect more value here in Australia, rather than, you know, just shipping it offshore? And I think some of the smaller farmers who are creating all of that value, we could actually all take a lesson from them and find out how they've done it and whether it's worked, because they're making a huge contribution to that total pool of $100 billion that we hope to get to in 2030. And I think COVID has certainly given us the opportunity to have some of those conversations too. We've put forward a regionalisation paper, as you say, with Get Australia Growing. We're, you know, collaborating now. Government is very interested in conversations about regionalisation and growing our regional communities and building our own capabilities here on shore. So I really think that that's absolutely part of the conversation.
Yep.
Righto. Tony, it's 5 to 1, so I think we'll pull the questions up there. Any more? No more? Good. So that's it. So that's good. All right. Thank you. I'm just going to now say thank you so much for dialing in today. It's been in a way, it's been a little bit disappointing not being able to have the lovely event that we've had in the past, but we look forward to that again in the future. But it's been great having your support, and it's been great having you online, asking the questions and listening. The report card and the media release will be available now online, and it's just through www.nff.org.au. Can I please thank every one of you for your support this year, for your support of the NFF, for your support of Australian agriculture, and importantly for farmers across Australia. We've really felt the love a little bit this year, which is not always the case in terms of agriculture. And I think people really valuing being able to get such amazing food and fibre here at home. So thank you very much for that support. I wish you all a really happy, safe Christmas and a new year, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person in 2021, and hopefully it will be the end. I'm sure everybody's enjoyed being able to stack up their cake tins like I have, but by the same token, it's quite good to get back to doing personal things as well. Last word from you, Tony.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your support. And like Fiona says, have a safe, happy rest of the year and Christmas, and look forward to a great year in 2021.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.